Hey there, folks. Clyde Chester here. And tonight I need to tell you about one of the darkest chapters in American history. A chapter that was deliberately erased, buried, and forgotten for 70 years. I'm talking about Rosewood, Florida, a prosperous black town that was wiped off the map in January 1923 by a white mob in an orgy of racial violence that left dozens dead and an entire community destroyed. This is a story about racism at its most brutal, about how easily a lie can become a justification for murder, and about how America has this terrible habit of forgetting the atrocities committed against its black citizens. This is the story of the Rosewood Massacre, and I warn you, it's going to be hard to hear, but it needs to be told. Let me take you back to 1923, to a small town in Levy County, Florida, tucked into the pine forests and swampland of the Gulf Coast. Rosewood was unusual for the Jim Crow South. It was a majority black town, and not just any black town, but a relatively prosperous one. About 200 to 300 people lived there, most of them black families who owned their own land, their own homes, their own businesses. There were 2 churches, a school, a Masonic hall, a general store, a sugar mill. Many of the men worked at the pencil mill in nearby Sumner, a white town just a couple miles down the road, but they came home to Rosewood, to a community where they could live with dignity, where their children could go to school, where they didn't have to step off the sidewalk when white people walked by. This was rare in 1923 Florida. This was the height of Jim Crow, a time when black Americans in the South lived under a system designed to keep them poor, powerless, and terrified. Lynchings were common. More than 250 black people had been lynched in Florida alone since the end of Reconstruction. The Ku Klux Klan was experiencing a massive resurgence, with millions of members nationwide and enormous political power. Being black in the rural South meant living with the constant threat of violence, of being accused of some transgression against white supremacy and facing a rope or a bullet with no trial, no justice, no accountability. But Rosewood had managed to create something different, something that challenged the very foundations of white supremacy in the South. Here were black people who weren't sharecroppers or servants, who didn't depend on white landowners for their survival, who had built their own independent community. And that made some white people in the area very uncomfortable. Success and independence in black communities was seen as a threat, as uppity, as a violation of the natural order that Jim Crow was designed to enforce. The spark that ignited the Rosewood Massacre came on January 1st, 1923 in Sumner. A white woman named Fannie Taylor, married to a mill worker, stumbled out of her house that morning claiming she'd been attacked and beaten by a black man. She had visible bruises, her clothes were torn, and she was clearly distressed. Her neighbor, a white man, fired his gun to raise the alarm, and within hours, white men from Sumner and surrounding areas were forming a mob, grabbing their guns and preparing to hunt down the supposed attacker. Now, we need to talk about what really happened that morning, because the truth matters, even 70 years after the fact. Fannie Taylor was having an affair with a white man who wasn't her husband. That morning, her lover had come to visit while her husband was at work, and things had gotten rough. Maybe they'd fought, maybe things had gotten violent, we don't know exactly. But when her husband came home unexpectedly, Fannie panicked. She couldn't admit to the affair, couldn't explain the bruises and her disheveled state, so she did what white women in the Jim Crow South had done countless times before when they needed to explain away evidence of sexual impropriety. She blamed a black man. It was the perfect lie, the one that would absolve her of any wrongdoing and redirect her husband's rage toward a safer target. In the racist logic of 1923 Florida, a black man attacking a white woman was entirely believable, entirely expected, and entirely deserving of the most brutal retribution. The mob that formed that day was looking for a specific man, a black convict who'd escaped from a chain gang and was rumored to be hiding in the area. His name was Jesse Hunter, and he'd been spotted near Rosewood.
The mob decided that Hunter must be Fannie Taylor's attacker, despite having zero evidence connecting him to the supposed assault. They didn't need evidence. They had a white woman's accusation and a black man's proximity, and that was more than enough. The mob went to Rosewood looking for Jesse Hunter. They went to the home of Aaron Carrier, a black man known to have helped people in the community, thinking Hunter might be hiding there. When Aaron's mother, Sarah Carrier, refused to let the mob search her home without a warrant, refused to cooperate with their lynch mob justice, they became enraged. How dare this black woman stand up to them, refuse them, assert her rights? On January 4th, the mob came back to Sarah Carrier's house, this time looking for a black man named Sam Carter, who they decided was also involved somehow. The logic of lynch mobs doesn't require actual evidence or coherent reasoning. Sam Carter was a local blacksmith, a respected member of the Rosewood community. The mob captured him, tortured him to get him to confess to helping Jesse Hunter, and when he refused or couldn't give them the answers they wanted, they lynched him. They tied him to a car, dragged him down the road, and shot him to death. Sam Carter became the first victim of the Rosewood Massacre. The violence escalated from there with terrifying speed. On January 4th and 5th, more white men poured into the area from surrounding counties, some coming as far as Georgia. These weren't just angry neighbors anymore. These were Klan members, white supremacists who saw an opportunity to put black people in their place, to terrorize an entire community, to destroy this prosperous black town that dared to exist. On the night of January 4th, the mob surrounded Sarah Carrier's house. Inside was Sarah, her son Sylvester, and a group of black people who'd taken refuge there, knowing the mob was hunting them. The mob demanded that Sarah turn over anyone hiding in her house. She refused. And so the mob opened fire on the house, shooting through the walls, through the windows, trying to kill everyone inside. What happened next was extraordinary. The people inside the house shot back. They had guns. This was rural Florida. Everyone had guns, and they defended themselves. Sylvester Carrier was an excellent marksman, and in the firefight that followed, he managed to kill 2 white men and wound several others before the mob's superior numbers overwhelmed the defenders. Sylvester was killed, his mother Sarah was killed, others in the house were killed. The exact number is unclear because the mob made sure to control the narrative afterward, but at least 6 people died in and around the Carrier house that night. The fact that black people had fought back, had killed white men in self-defense, sent the white mob into an absolute frenzy. This wasn't supposed to happen. Black people were supposed to submit, to accept whatever violence was inflicted on them, to know their place. Fighting back was the ultimate transgression, and it demanded the ultimate punishment. Over the next several days, the mob went on a rampage through Rosewood. They went house to house, burning buildings, shooting anyone they saw, terrorizing the entire black community. Families fled into the swamps and forests, hiding in the palmetto scrub and cypress stands, watching their homes burn from a distance. Mothers held hands over their children's mouths to keep them quiet as the mob passed nearby. People hid in the freezing water of the swamps for hours, sometimes days, trying to stay alive. They burned the churches, they burned the school, they burned the Masonic Hall. They burned homes, barns, the general store, everything. They shot people's livestock, destroyed property, looted what they wanted, and burned the rest. They were trying to erase Rosewood from existence, to make sure that this black community that dared to be prosperous and independent would never exist again. The exact death toll from the Rosewood Massacre has never been definitively established. The official count, the one white authorities gave, was 8 people. 6 black people and 2 white men. But survivors and their descendants have always insisted the real number was much higher. Bodies were hidden in the swamps, buried in unmarked graves, burned in the fires. Some estimates put the death toll at 40 or possibly higher. We'll never know the real number because the people doing the killing had every incentive to minimize it, and the people who survived were too traumatized and too afraid to speak openly for decades. And here's one of the most heartbreaking parts of this story. While this massacre was happening, while a white mob was systematically destroying an entire black community and murdering its residents, the local sheriff and law enforcement did almost nothing. Sheriff Robert Elias Walker knew what was happening. He was there, but he claimed he couldn't control the mob, couldn't protect the black residents of Rosewood, couldn't enforce the law. Some survivors later said he actively cooperated with the mob, that he helped coordinate the violence. At the very least, he stood by and let it happen. The governor of Florida, Kerry Hardy, was informed about the violence. Black leaders and civil rights organizations begged him to send the National Guard to protect Rosewood's residents. He refused. He claimed the situation was under control, that local authorities could handle it. This was a lie, and he knew it. The governor of Florida watched a black town get destroyed and did nothing. But there were a few white people who helped. John Wright, the white owner of the general store in Rosewood, and his son hid black families in his store and his home. William Bryce, the conductor of a train that ran through the area, stopped his train and allowed black refugees to board,